Whenever we think of war, what do we usually think about? Soldiers, guns, missiles, drones, and things like that, right? Battlefields, a lot of violence, people actively fighting with each other. That is our perception of war. But we need to understand that this is not the only way modern wars are fought. Actually, there can be an entirely different kind of war, where there is no involvement of tanks, fighter jets, or naval vessels. And yet it has the power to destroy nations. Yes, a kind of war that can starve people, totally paralyze an army, and even reshape the global balance of power. I am referring to economic warfare, where countries defeat their adversaries without even firing a single bullet. How do they do it? By weaponizing things like currency, trade, technology, energy, and supply chains. But why are they able to weaponize these things? Because we are living in a highly globalized world. Today, no country is entirely self-sufficient. Every nation relies on someone else for energy, technology, food, or other resources. The world today has become deeply interconnected. Countries trade heavily with each other. Supply chains are stretched across continents. Factories in one country depend on raw materials from others. Energy flows through critical sea lanes and choke points. So it wouldn't be wrong to say that human civilization has become economically interconnected like never before. This interconnectedness between economies has definitely created enormous prosperity, but at the same time, it has also created dependence and vulnerability. Countries are dependent on each other for a lot of things, and this dependence can be used as a weapon to weaken your adversary. That is why nations use instruments like tariffs and duties to disrupt supply chains, protect domestic industries, and force adversaries to renegotiate the rules of commerce. By imposing blockades and controlling critical choke points, nations try to starve an opponent of critical resources. They try to freeze the development of rival powers. The idea is simple. If you have no fuel, how will your military operate? If you do not have semiconductors, how will you build your weapons? If you do not have electricity, how are you going to run your factories? If you are isolated from international payments, how will your banks survive? No imported chemicals means no medicines. No spare parts means no vehicles. So economics is not separate from national security. It is pivotal to national security. Therefore, we can say that a nation's military capability ultimately depends on its economic capability. Over the years, countries have realized that defeating an adversary does not always require destroying its army on the battlefield. There are ways to win without even firing a single bullet. Yes, all that military action, bombing cities and sending troops, is not always necessary. You just have to find a way to suffocate your enemy's economy. Because after all, it is the economy that makes the army possible in the first place. So if you can cut off revenue, block trade, and choke supply chains, you can cripple your enemy's economy. Even without active violence on the ground, conditions can be created that eventually lead to an economic collapse in the target nation. I mean, why use military force or invade a country when you can simply block the supplies it needs? Why bomb a country when you can isolate it from the global financial system? Why risk the lives of your soldiers when you can force your opponent to change its policies through economic pressure? That is the logic behind modern economic warfare. Great powers like China and the US engage in economic warfare to avoid triggering an all-out hot war because of the massive destructive potential of an all-out war. Given the dangerous weapons that exist today, the cost is astronomical. Traditional war carries high risks. Economic warfare, on the other hand, allows for calibrated risk. So countries often prefer to resort to economic warfare instead and try to gain leverage. Economic warfare allows countries to project power, punish adversaries, and achieve strategic objectives. It is like waging an invisible war, a war that is different from traditional war and is not confined to a specific geographic theater. Many times, its impacts extend far beyond national borders. For instance, consider the blockade around the Strait of Hormuz. It has sent shockwaves around the entire globe. So it is just like that. One signature on an executive order, and that's it. Factories start shutting down. Massive job losses take place. The target nation starts facing resource shortages. Inflation is all over the place. Banks come under immense pressure. All of this could eventually lead to a total economic collapse. That is the power of economic warfare. So it does not always take a military intervention. Sometimes it can merely be a signature on an order that can empty grocery shelves in the target nation. Look around the world today, you will see it happening. And it is completely transforming international politics. Be it the Hormuz blockade, the US imposing sanctions, China restricting exports of critical minerals, or Russia using its energy as geopolitical leverage. All of this is nothing but economic warfare. Tariffs, sanctions, freezing foreign assets, restricting investments, banning technology transfers, and influencing global institutions. All of this is a part of economic warfare. As competition over supply chains intensifies, nations are trying to control shipping routes and access to critical minerals. They are trying to influence payment systems. And all of this has transformed the global economy into a battlefield. It seems as if the lines between economics and warfare are disappearing. The methods of this economic contest are what we will explore in this course. Countries are already engaged in an economic battle. To reduce their vulnerabilities, they are building strategic reserves, diversifying imports, and developing domestic industries. They are trying to protect critical technologies and securing shipping lanes. There is also a pushback from nations. Countries try to avoid sanctions, take countermeasures, and resist currency pressure. They try to build their own systems and become self-reliant. Some examples that we'll study in this course include shadow fleets, alternative payment networks, and attempts at de-dollarization. Economic warfare can prolong conflicts and sometimes can even prevent them. China became a global power through its economic strength. This is quite in line with the history lesson that economic power creates geopolitical power. Several empires have risen in the past because they controlled trade routes, and many have fallen because they lost access to resources. Therefore, in today's world, to demystify global politics, you must understand trade, energy, finance, technology, logistics, supply chains, shipping, currencies, natural resources, and industrial production. Because all of these have become invisible weapons in modern warfare. That is exactly why this course has been created. To understand how nations use economics as an instrument of power and to study economic warfare from scratch, step by step. By the end of this course, you will be able to answer questions like what exactly is economic warfare? How do nations weaponize trade? Why do sanctions succeed in some cases and fail in others? How do tariffs influence global power? How do countries weaponize energy supplies? What is the role of currencies in international power? How do nations redesign supply chains for national security? And how is artificial intelligence changing economic competition? This course is designed for everyone. Whether you are a student, a business professional, an investor, a policymaker, or simply someone curious about learning how the world works. Because economic warfare affects everyone. It impacts our everyday lives. So understanding this invisible architecture of global power can prove extremely valuable. So welcome to the course on economic warfare, the ultimate tool of statecraft. Let us begin.